Now we will be discussing about the business government relation with respect to the context of globalization. As we have seen, like from the previous discussion, globalization means deterritorialization. So when you are talking of deterritorialization, so with respect to regulation also, like there is no clear demarcations and relaxations are there. So maybe laws of one particular country is not very well framed regarding certain issues. So these problems are also there. So when you are talking of globalization, so we understand like there is a traditional context in how the business environment in which the business is functioning, and also there is a changed context in which the business is functioning. So, and the expectations in these two contexts and the roles of the business and government in these two contexts are different, and the powers enjoyed by the relative power enjoyed positions by the government and the business in these two contexts are different. So here when you are discussing globalization and business government relations, we are trying to focus on these issues. So we will define globalization as the progressive eroding of the relevance of territorial bases for social, economic and political activities, processes and relations. So it talks of like a transition from a traditional to a global context. So British political scientist Anthony McGrew, he has described this as a transition from a Westphalian setting to a post-Westphalian setting. So there are different changes happening in different areas, like with respect to what is the nature of the society, who is the holder of the political power, how is the manifestation of the political activity done, who is the addressee of the regulations, what are the intensity of the regulations, and what are the democratic control of the political powers. So we will be discussing this two scenarios where we see like there is a Westphalian setting and a post-Westphalian setting. So with respect to society, we find in the Westphalian setting it is the nation, but the nature of the society in the globalized context, it becomes like a world society, like the whole world is one society. Holder of political power, so it is like in the national context, it is the monopoly by the national government. So but in Westphalian setting, there is a like distribution of the political powers between the multitude of governmental, civil society and private actors, because it is a world society. N number of nations have come together with their own settings of governmental, societal and private actors. So it is a multitude of governmental, civil society and private actors. When it is the manifestation of political activity, it is in national context in the Westphalian setting. It is generally the national regulations or laws. So, when we are talking of the world society and there is a multitude of governmental, civil society and private actors, so obviously it comes to like the system of transnational negotiations, these becomes very important. So, what are the negotiations reached regarding certain maybe universal codes that required to be followed, whether some compact has been signed or not, which the countries who are in trade relationship with one another are going to follow or not. So, it talks of like systems of transnational negotiations, codes of conduct. So, the addressees of the regulations, to whom the regulations are directed, are like social actors, means the domestic companies and the citizens of that particular nation. So, that is for the Westphalian context. For the post Westphalian context, it is the nation states, that is the European member states, example of the MNCs, on whom these regulations are, they are the addressees of these regulations. So, the intensity of regulation, how much, whether it is becoming more strong or weak. So, it is for the national context, it is becoming weak, like in terms of there is more of deregulation and privatization. But when you are talking of the post Westphalian setting, so these regulations, the codes of ethics that conduct the organizations, member countries have to follow, these are becoming increasing day by day, and it's becoming tough day by day, so that some regulatory mechanism at least can be followed by the members, so to maintain certain uniformity and balance in the way the business is done. In democratic control of political power is higher in case of national context, because the addressees of the regulations are the citizens and they can exercise their democratic power in the control of the political power. But when in the post Westphalian setting, the democratic control of the political power has reduced, because the addressee of the regulation are the member states or the MNCs, and the citizens of the society sometimes do not have any say in determining the contract signed between the MNCs and the government, or the regulations that have been imposed. So, they are not involved in many cases in this decision making. So, the democratic control of political power is lesser, is lower in globalized context. When you are discussing the globalization, government and business, the changing roles of each other, we find like in the national context, in the Westphalian setting, the role of the state is dominant as a regulator, as either by the restricting of the business or by enabling the business and playing the major role in the license of operation for the business. So, But in the global context, in the post-Westphalian setting, the particular role of the state, specifically of the the developing country, is that of a dependence role, where they are the addressees of the regulations, and they have to take care, like in their particular country, these regulations have been taken care of so that it gives a facilitating environment for the MNCs to come and do their business over there. So, the role of company is that of a dependent in the national context as the addressee of the regulation. So, in the national context, they function as a dependent, but in the global context, they play a very dominant role of, like maybe even withdrawal from a country, the corporate power of withdrawal from a country, if certain regulations are not followed, or certain regulations are not given, certain regulations are not maybe relaxed for them. So, the types of regulations which are there for the national context are that of imperative regulations, which is that for the given by the laws by the state to follow. In the global context, for the nation states, it is imperative regulation. For the private transnational actors like the MNCs, it is private self-controlled regulation, because it is not possible for the state to design so many regulations incorporating different ways of doing business and to monitor, cross-check for whether all the MNCs are functioning in a proper way. So, self-control regulations are very important for the MNCs. What we find over here is a change in the role of the state in the and the company also from the national context to the global context. If we compare the relative roles of the state and the company across the two settings, we find the role of the state in the national context is that of a dominant as a regulator, and the role of the company is that of dependent as addressee of the regulation. While in the global context, the role of the state is that of dependent as addressee of the regulation, but the company plays a very prominent dominant role through the corporate power of withdrawal. So, we find like there is a shift from the shift in power from the being a dominant position. In the national context, the state is in a dominant position by the power of they acting as a regulator, while in the global context, the company plays a dominant role by the corporate power of withdrawal. In the global context, the state plays the role of the dependent as the addressee of the regulation, and in the national context, the company plays the role of the dependent as the addressee of the regulation. So, we find there is a shift in the roles of being dominant or dependent, and the relative shift in roles when it is a national context, Westphalian setting, and it is a global context or the post-Westphalian setting, and the types of regulations whom it is addressed to, who are where self-regulations are required or not. So these type of, we understand, like because the company has a dominant power of withdrawal in the global context, and state is itself is that of the addressee of a regulation. So for the private national actors, self-controlled regulations becomes very important, because they have the corporate power of withdrawal, and they are playing a dominant role in the business government relations. In the, if we understand like the national context and the Westphalian context are and the post-Westphalian context and the global context are functioning side by side. So certain businesses which are still located in the national states, so they are subject to national laws, so which we call that of imperative regulation. So this becomes problems when there is an oppressive and like authoritarian regime, and the business has to function in that environment, then it becomes a problem. So in a global level, again, corporations assume more of a dominant role, that like that of the dominant role, while the government is still bound to their confinement of territorial boundaries. So, and they have only limited influence beyond their national boundaries. So the corporate assumes a more dominant role, and it may give rise to like the race to the bottom, as we have already discussed earlier, where they try to go to the land where there is less of regulations, implementation of regulations, and more freedom to work, more they can generate more profit and all, and land with less of regulations, less of best practices followed, becomes more attractive as location targets for business. So this may happen, which is called race to the bottom, and these may have an effect on the life of the citizens of that particular country where these MNCs are going, because in order to remain attractive to the MNCs as a location for investment, so these regulations may not be taken care of, working conditions may not be taken care of, exploitations may be there, so that the outcome is profitable for the MNCs. They generate more profit by producing at a very low cost and maybe selling at a very high margin, and that difference gives them more profit. And this ability to produce at a low cost by compromising on the rights of the employees or the citizens at large may make the developing country more attractive. So this is called the race to the bottom. In business government relations, in international trade regimes, we find that there are regional bodies or the global players who have a impact on how the business is done through the regulations that they have set or the funding opportunities that they have created. So, and because the role of these bodies is to enable trade and exchange of goods and services. So through this policies taken where these exchanges are possible, there is a fair competition, fair trade and all, but it may act as a double-edged sword. Like they can enable access to cheap labor and large markets. So, but the same type of institutions, the same institutions increase their competitions and limit businesses for others. So, this is like you're giving access to a cheap labor and being produced over there. They are increasing the competition and limiting the business for the maybe local industries which are there. So this may become like a double-edged sword. So one side you are providing access to cheap labor and making it profitable for the organizations who are coming from on this, like maybe post-Westphalian setting when you're talking of global organizations, but they do at a cheap cost and go because they have an infrastructure to deal with it, like producing in one country and selling in others, or spreading its products at a like throughout the country, and this may again create a competition sort of for a threat sort of for the local players, which in many cases they may not be able to withstand. In the next module, we are going to discuss corporate citizenship and regulations, where we'll be focusing on business as a key player in the regulatory game. Thank you.